Okay, here we go. Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to our fifth installment of Poetry Really Matters. Wow, David, can you believe it's the fifth show already? 5 months. Wow.
I can't believe it. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Especially, I think five is not an especially great number, but today it is because we have a major announcement to share with you. But
A
before
very,
we
very
do
special
that,
announcement.
let's do some poetry because we need more and more poetry these days. So I know, David, you have a high boon to read to us,
I
and
do.
I chose a poem from my own book. So before you read your poem, could you explain to everyone what a high boon is?
Yes, I will. So I entered a weekly challenge, a weekly poetry challenge that I do over at Colin Chisbrough's website, and they put up prompts every week. And what I try to do is I like to do a lot of found poetry. So I've written a found haibun, and basically the way that works is that a regular haiku you can traditionally they say is 575, but there's some argument over the syllable counts. But most people tend to look in the Western's eyes. They do 575 for a typical haiku. For a haibun, it's basically a combination of prose and poetry. So you're writing terse, very kind of sort of concise sentences that flow like poetry. They don't have to rhyme. They just have to have a poetic feel or kind of empathy to them. And what it is the prose will describe the feeling you're kind of then put across with the haiku that you put at the end of the poem. So it's a combination poem, and so the haibun is basically a combination of prose and an ordinary haiku, which would normally focus on nature or aspects of nature.
Mhm.
So that's how I created it. And the other aspect, the way I created it, was that my one was a found haibun. So I used another poem in order to create my poem. So I used words from Ode to Silence by Ender St. Vincent Millay. I won't read that poem. You can look it up online, but it's because it's a very, very long poem. But I picked words from that, and then that's how I created my haibun. So I'm going to give that a quick read now. And haibuns, by the way, also have a title. Unlike general haikus, you don't have to have titles for haikus, but a haibun is expected to have a title. So I used one of the lines that I had of my prose in that as well. So my poem is called "Sound in the Winds That Will Not Silence a Dream," a found haibun by me. Comfort you seek in this noisy now. The friendly rain and snow be of heart. Sound in the wind that will not silence a dream. Beauty from music among the air, whispering a moment of laughter. Between the mountains and the sea, know not where a ruined place was once, but now is instead an echo. Her shadow is anywhere in the world. Lovely before and after they were there. Consider this, consider there is, beyond breath, divine being of mood you seek. Desire has returned, before all things she is there. Gracious night and day, drink her wine, taste restless earth, perfect without haste. And that's the whole thing of my haibun.
That's it.
Yeah, that's the end.
Oh, I would have listened to you for like an hour. It was so nice. I'm like, do, 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 do. I'm in dreamland right now. It's very, very nice. And I read your poem. You showed it to me, so it's nicer to actually listen to it than reading it. So
Out loud is
very
always
nice.
a different experience, I think,
Hmm.
and I always encourage people to read their poems aloud, even if it's to themselves, into maybe even a video. You could record
Yeah.
yourself and see what it sounds like. You want to hear what it sounds like to your ears, I think,
Hmm.
as well as your eyes.
Yeah. No,
It's a
that's
good way.
yeah, that's a very good suggestion. And it also makes you more self confident because we tend to be hypercritical of our own voices because we can't really hear ourselves. So it's a good tip for people who are a little scared. You gain self confidence by getting used to your voice and getting used to your quirks and some things you think, well, it's awful. I was awful, and actually, you listen to yourself and you realize, oh wow, that was not that bad after all. So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
great tip, David. So my poem is taken from my latest poetry book, The Heart of Space, which I released a few weeks ago. So the piece is titled "The Greatness in Trials," and I chose it because I think we need to hear that once in a while. The importance of not having just everything easy and to have a little bit of challenges occasionally. It makes us grow. So here goes. The more we grow, the more pain we throw in the air of space. One day, eyes open to the world, one sees the beauty of sorrow. For there is a natural splendor in the way we handle truth and feelings. Bittersweet memories and instant gratification will not change the world. Hope will always be the anchor. Raging seas and tempests will scratch the surface of things. But deep within, sovereign is the hour, the instant of graceful harmony that leads body and soul to tender trinity. Remember the sweet melody of the hardest trials, for they are the only keys to happiness's locks. Oh, the greatness in trials. There you go. I'm done. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's I read a lot of my poetry out loud because I like to be in my readers' minds. I like to understand what my readers like about the poetry I write. It makes me understand myself better. What about you?
Do you read it to your dogs, and are they your audience?
My dogs don't care. But what about you?
What do you mean? Who do I read it out to?
Yeah,
I
do
don't
you
have a
read
lot
to
of people.
yourself? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. I read to myself. Sometimes I read the odd poem to anybody that's around the house that I can capture. But in this isolation sort of times, there's only just me now, so I'm just talking to an empty wall. But I've got a stuffed dog that I can talk to. I've got a Wallace and Gromit dog that I can talk to. A lot of showing to.
Oh, there you go.
This is the one that
It's
I've got.
cute. It's cute.
He's my little Gromit.
Oh yeah. No, but joke aside, laughing aside, reading to yourself is really good. I used to speak to myself in the shower and reading to myself in the shower. And as funny as it is, the shower is the place where you're the most comfortable about
Yeah.
sharing, about being yourself. I've noticed. So it's a good idea to do it in a place that you're really comfortable, in a room in your house where you're really comfortable. And it's really an important way to train your brain to think positively about your art and about yourself too.
I think it helps with flow because when you hear how it comes out, if you struggle on certain words, I mean, I do that to myself all the time. I usually can't get through one of my poems perfectly on the first go, so you'll notice I'll stop a couple of times every so often if I haven't immediately read something recently. Then what will happen is I'll have a little stutter or something. But I find that to improve flow, if you can hear what it's like actually being read, then you start to think, oh, okay, is there a way I can make that a bit better, because it might be a little bit too I mean, it's nothing to do with grammar or anything like that. It's just a general flow of the poem. If it's difficult for you to read it, then I would imagine it would be difficult for someone, because you're entering the mind of you're becoming a reader rather than the writer when you created it. When you read it out loud. So if by reading out loud and becoming the reader, you can then get in their mindset and then just go, actually, I'm stumbling over a couple of words here. Maybe I could make this a little bit easier for someone to read, clarify certain areas or points of things. And that's how I work on the editing process. I think the writing process, you get the basic foundations down and you edit it as well as you can, and then you try and read it aloud to see if there's any edits that you can make that will improve the flow.
Yeah. And it's actually, we're going to talk about this right now, and we'll make our announcement later, because this is a very nice transition towards what we wanted to talk about later. But we'll talk about it now. So our tips for today. We started creating a series of very short articles to help you with the creative process, with the social media marketing process, and so on and so forth, for poets and for writers in general, and artists, because everything works in the same way. So we've started posting an article every Thursday. And remind me of the title of the series.
It was the Poetry Advice Clinic, I think, is the
Yes, thank you.
yeah.
The Poetry Advice Clinic. So we have written three articles right now, and the last two articles that we wrote were about proofreading and finding inspiration. So what you mentioned about editing is the same as proofreading. So
Yeah.
the main difference between proofreading and editing, for those who are not aware of it, is that proofreading is all about the grammar and the language and all the typos. So a proofreader will basically sometimes they do editing and proofreading, but most of the time they just do proofreading. So they're going to correct the mistakes in terms of grammar and the typos and so on and so forth. An editor will look at the flow, how everything flows together, if some sentences need to be lightened, removed, and so on and so forth, if some words can be replaced with others, and so on and so forth. So editing and proofreading work together to ensure that your poems look and work the best. So one of the reasons we refuse poems, one of the main reasons is that there are typos and there are grammatical errors. So that's one of the most frequent things actually that happen when people send us their poetry. If you want to be published anywhere, whether it's a book or a magazine or a journal, you have to send work that have been proofread and edited, that is ready to be published. So you have to ensure that your work is edited and proofread accordingly. So it's very hard to do it yourself. And I'm not saying that because English is not my mother tongue. It doesn't matter if English is your mother tongue or not. French is my mother tongue. I'm a translator by profession. So I translate. I don't translate as much as I used to, but I still do it a little bit. And even when I translate into French, which is my mother tongue, I ask someone else to look at my French to ensure that I haven't left mistakes. So English being your mother tongue is not an excuse not to have your work proofread. Actually, you should have several pairs of eyes look at your work. And we're talking about people who know English well enough. That's what I'm talking about. Not just friends who don't know grammar, don't know, who can't catch your typos. So make sure that when you submit your poetry to any magazine, and it doesn't have to be us, it's in general, if you want to submit your poetry to a publisher, traditional publisher, or even if you want to self-publish, ensure that your work is proofread, that you can do it yourself, of course. There's nothing wrong with it. But we strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that you ask other people who know English well enough to look after you and ensure that your work looks as professional as possible, because your job has to do with the word, with language, with linguistics. If you send us a piece that is full of typos, full of grammatical errors, that makes us wonder how professional you are, how professionally you behave, and so on and so forth. So it's the same as a doctor. A doctor, to operate on a patient, has to know the human body. It's the same thing. So your tools, as a writer, as a poet, your tools are the language and your mastery of the language. So ensure that your work is properly proofread. And do not just rely on yourself to ensure that the work is well done.
It's an interesting point, Cendrine, because editors, I think, are a little bit worried about editing poetry. When it comes to editing novels and novellas, they're more confident because they can recommend certain things about changing things in the story structure, or saying that this doesn't work or that doesn't work, and the writer should, in theory, take their advice on board. But I do know some editors that are worried about editing poems simply because they don't want to mess with the flow or the style. And it's like, well, you don't have to worry about that, because I've had poetry hit my door, and I've edited it and checked things and stuff, and I haven't had to alter the flow or even the way it's written, or even if there's funny kind of sort of ways that they cut up the sentences and things. Is that providing you kind of get a gist of how the person's written the poem, it really needs a poet, I think, to read poetry to be able to edit something properly, in terms of grammatical things and typos. But I don't really find it that difficult to say I can go through someone's poem and say, well, you're 90% of the way there, but there are these little things, and you can always kind of have that dialogue with the poet as well, saying I think this is that, and then see if they can come up with justification. We've had that in the past before, where we both say we might look at something and say, okay, is that incorrect, and we'll look it up online, and then you'll then say to me, oh, this is why I've done that, and then I can say, oh, okay. And at least we've brought it up and we've resolved that issue, and you know that it's correct. But I'd rather someone did that for me than just left something and they weren't aware that, they just let the thing be submitted. Because I think when you submit to magazines and places, you've really got to up your game. Is that it's not good enough if you've published it on your blog and then you think, well, because I published it in my blog, it's good enough to go into an anthology or a magazine or something like that. That's not the case. Is that you get away with a lot by publishing on your website, because there's no one to stop you from writing whatever you want. And there's no one there to. A lot of people will compliment you, but they're not going to come along and spend their time correcting things that might be wrong. And as you say, you're too involved and you're too close to the process when you're creating it yourself. So there will be things that you miss. It's like I've gone through things that I've done with a fine-tooth comb, and then I've got you to look at my sort of things, and we go vice versa. And there might be some tiny little thing that you'll miss. And you won't believe that you've missed it, but it will be something that you've missed because you've had obsessed over the document, and maybe you've caught a multitude of things, but you just won't catch everything. And if you do, then maybe you're a proofreader in your day job as well, and you know what to look for in your own writing. But that's as we say, it's just human nature. If you can get people to check things, then they will find things wrong, and it saves you a lot of bother, because you don't want to. They say there's a horrible percentage, isn't there, of things that are rejected by magazines and anthologies and other places, and it's simply probably the vast majority are just because of that. There's other reasons as well. It might not be that the theme or content is right for the magazine, but I guarantee probably 80-90% of rejections are simply because of typos and grammatical errors that weren't resolved right from the start. You've got to really polish a piece until it absolutely shines, and be happy that it's been read by at least a couple of people before I think you'd go anywhere near submitting it to people.
And then my cat is behind me. and most importantly, don't take that personally, because at the end of the day, language is your tool, because you're a writer, so language is your tool. So if someone tells you there are typos, there are grammatical errors, make sure that you have that corrected. As you mentioned, editing is a different story altogether, because editing is really a matter of personal taste rather than anything else, especially in poetry. It's a little different for novellas and novels, where an editor, and there are different types of editors, it's very complicated, but editors are there to tell you, this would work better, remove this word, replace it with another one, and so on and so forth. This is very different, because it's an entire story and it goes over 50,000 words, 10,000 words. It's very different. A poem, it's really the essence of the poet what we're talking about, the essence of the piece. So changing a word may change the entire message of the poem. So editing a poem is a slightly different thing. So it's a matter of taste, but by all means, if you want to have your poetry book edited, your manuscript edited, by all means do it. But do not take things personally if someone tells you, this is not working, change it completely, and so on and so forth. Make sure that the feedback is constructive. So proofreading is a very totally different thing. Someone who reads your poem and it's not edited, and they may like it or may not like it, but that's it. But if there are too many typos and grammatical errors, that's when people are going to say, I don't want to read this poet anymore. He or she is not serious about their poetry. They're not very professional.
I was going to bring up a very important point, is that, like you say, we've had submissions where some of the metaphors or similes or just lines don't make sense because of the fact that they weren't proofread. The lines just end up becoming nonsense. They're either alluding to something, the line that's written, it just doesn't come across. You just don't understand what the person is trying to say, because they've picked the wrong words, or they put them in the wrong kind of sort of context. And that's the most important thing, I think, is that a poem can be abstract, but then we've had people that have just written complete and utter gobbledygook because they don't know how the metaphor, the simile is sort of come across. And that's why proofreading is so important, because otherwise you could end up with a poem where you think this is the meaning you're trying to convey, when actually you've got something there that's got a string of sentences that look very pretty. They look very pretty, don't they? We like the flowery language, but they don't convey any kind of message on an abstract level.
Yeah, and this is very interesting because you and I had a conversation a long time ago about one of my manuscripts, about, we talked. You remember? Did you used to, or did you used to remember the conversation we had about used to in a
Yeah,
question or not? So, and also, sometimes the question of culture and different countries as well. You live in the UK, I live in Canada. In Canada, for example, we accept the British spelling and the American spelling.
both you
So
do.
it can get very, very complicated. So depending on who I'm talking to, I use a different spelling. So, for example, color. If I'm speaking or writing to a U.S. citizen, I will say color with OR. But if I am going to write for a British audience, I will use OUR, the ending for color. So it's also interesting. Sometimes you and I have conversations about language because we live in two different parts of the world. So proofreading can also help in that matter, I think.
Yeah, because ultimately the English that the person could be using might be relevant to their language that they normally write in, but then when they're trying to translate it to English for our eyes, it could just be that's why something doesn't come out quite right. And we just, as I say, it just means something comes out where they think the sentence is correct. But it just doesn't, as I say, it just, when you put it together, it just doesn't make sense. And you can see what they're driving at, but then you get amusing little quirks in the writing, and you just think that wasn't deliberate with the poems. What's happened here is the person's tried to put their thoughts into English, and we've had that, haven't we, from people that say they've got English language degrees and stuff, and you just think, well, that it proves our point then, is that you could be the best English professor in the world, but you still need to get someone to proofread your work.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And proofreading can also, and based on conversation you can have with your proofreader, it can also help you find inspiration for your other pieces as well, because you can talk about culture, you can mix different things and write for different audiences. It really depends who you're talking to. So I know you wanted to talk very quickly about finding inspiration, because this week you wrote a very short article in our series about prompts and finding inspiration. So I'll let you talk about that right now.
Yeah, sure. So the reason that I went and posted that article is because I feel like with the situation that everyone's in now, they're looking for inspiration for their writing, and we're all kind of just trying to amuse ourselves and keep ourselves active and busy while this all goes on around us in the background, with the virus. So I thought I would give people something to stimulate them, but also give them something that because we can't travel or because we can't go anywhere. I wanted to try and give people visual kind of sort of prompts that would stimulate their mind, but also make them feel happy to be in the environment they're in, because they can appreciate something visual to stimulate them. And I think my link covered lots of different museums. What was funny about it was that I found one with a vast quantity of other kind of sort of things, which we'll be sharing in a follow-up post next week. So there'll be like finding inspiration part 2. But what I loved about this particular post was that there are a lot of free virtual tours for these museums, and a lot of places are actually doing these things now. There's theatres and opera houses and other places. There are people reading for their children online and all kinds of sort of things. And the link that Cendrine's just put up on the screen now is it's just amazing, really, because when you go to that link, you'll see where I share the link to I think a dozen different places. And you've even got lots of different kind of sort of places around the world. But there's an International Women's History Museum. I think there's the NASA Museum, or NASA kind of objects and things. There's a huge variety of things. There's a Louvre in Paris. There are lots of different ones, and I feel like we can use written verbal prompts, but visual prompts, especially when you get to look at art and you get to kind of see it in 3D rather than just pictures. Kind of like some static pictures are lovely as well of art. But if you can actually look at it at any angle you want to, And that's what I found interesting with the link, Cendrine, because there's quite a few places in there that will offer free virtual tours. So you might not get to see the entire museum because they probably want to advertise for people to come to the museum in the future, but you will actually be able to get to see certain areas of the museum for free in your own virtual tour. And you could use that to either just relax for an evening or use it to stimulate some writing or other kind of sort of art that you're doing at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And being stimulated and motivated to write is a very important thing. So this is a fantastic post to put up, which helps us transition into our major announcement. In this day and age, we live in a very this is challenging times these days. So we wanted to entice you to write, to motivate you to write. So David and I are joining NaPoWriMo once again. You've been doing it a lot longer than me. It's my second year only. Strange. I've been a poet for 15 years, but so NaPoWriMo stands for National Poetry Writing Month. So it starts on April 1st, and for 30 days, poets around the world come together and write poems every single day. Some of them choose not to publish them. Others, like David and I, prefer publishing them, putting them on their blogs. So we're joining NaPoWriMo individually. So we're going to share our poetry every single day on the Auroras and Blossoms poetry pages on Twitter and Facebook. But our announcement is that we want you to join us as well. And we want you to create poetry because many of you are at home, not working. So you need something to do. And what's better than writing poetry? So we want you to write as much as you want and submit your poetry to us for a chance to be featured in a special NaPoWriMo digital anthology that we plan on publishing in a few months. So we have set up a special page with the guidelines, what our plans are, and so on and so forth. So we would like to gather 50 poems to put them into a digital anthology. So that's basically it. We want positive, uplifting, inspirational poetry written during NaPoWriMo. So you're more than welcome to publish your poetry elsewhere, but especially on your blogs, especially on social media, but we want to see your poetry. So this page is very special because this is for the digital anthology. You can still submit to us through the regular submission page if you want. So for future issues, but this is specifically for an anthology, so an entire book with your poetry and some of ours too.
I mean, basically, Cendrine, we're not going to be publishing things in both, are we? We're saying that this is an additional opportunity for people to submit poetry for the anthology and for our general magazine that we publish quarterly. You know, our third issue is coming out at the end of this month, isn't it? I think it's the 1st or 2nd of April.
Yeah, in a few days.
But the reason that I make that distinction is just because you know, we're not out for anybody to try and double up their publishing credits. We're not going to take things from our issues and then put them into the anthology. This is going to be fresh, brand new poetry. So in theory, we're actually giving everybody an additional kind of sort of chance. We have a thing where you're allowed to submit one free poem per period. And by having the anthology, you can actually submit 2 poems to us for free, because you could put one through for our latest issue, consideration for our latest issue, and you can put one through for the anthology. And if anybody wants to submit more than 1 poem, then there's other kind of things that they've got to look at with the guidelines. But yeah, you know, it's a really great opportunity, we think, and ultimately you don't have to write poems every day in NaPoWriMo. You can just choose to write on the days that you feel up to it. The goal is to try and write 30, you know, 1 per day. There's the official website that you can go to, napowrimo.net, where you can actually be given a prompt, and you can share your poems there as well. And as we say, we're happy for you to publish your poems on your blog and then submit them to us. The difference being is that if you've got a poem somewhere else that you want to submit that you've written before, that should really go down our issue route, our magazine route, because the anthology is specifically for poems that are written in the month, and we've got a deadline, I think, of submission of the 15th of May, simply because you may have published something within the month, and then you then decide, okay, that's the one they want to submit to us. So we want to give you time to be able to write throughout the month, and then you might think, okay, I'll pick these particular poems to send over to Auroras and Blossoms, and we'd be happy to accept them. So there isn't any kind of sort of rush to get the poetry over to us. Spend your time throughout the month creating the best poems that you can with the prompts, and then have a look at them at the end of the month and think to yourself, okay, which ones would I like to submit to Auroras and Blossoms? And as we say, it doesn't matter that you publish them on your blog, because we are putting them in the anthology, and we are happy to gather them all together for this particular special project. So.
And what I want to say too is that we want to gather 50 poems. If we don't get the 50 poems, nothing is lost, my friends. Nothing is lost. So if we accept your poems, but they're not enough, they will be used in future issues of the magazine. So even if the anthology is not released, you will still get an opportunity to appear in the journal. In a future issue of the journal.
That's right. Yeah. We're still going to give you an opportunity to, if you've been accepted, our goal is 50. But if we can't reach that goal of 50, then, as Cendrine says, then you will be considered as a priority for our current magazine issues that we're sort of working on. So.
So speaking of which, our third issue is available to pre-order. For those who are interested. The release date for this issue will be April the 2nd, because if we did April 1st at April's Fool Day, people may not believe us. They may not believe us. And NaPoWriMo starts on April 1st, so it's better to do April 2nd. So you can pre-order if you want to, or you can wait until April 2nd. However, here is... we have a little contest going on right now, where if you sign up for our newsletter until March 31st, so you have a few days left. So you have until March 31st to sign up for a newsletter, and you will be entered for a chance to win a digital copy of the third issue. So take advantage, sign up for the newsletter. It's free.
It's totally free.
Yeah, it's totally free. You don't have to worry about anything. Just sign up, and then you'll be entered for a chance to win a copy of the issue. So you have the link appearing on the screen, and that's it. So is there anything you wanted to talk about today, David?
No, I think that it's going to be a very busy month for all of us when we get to April, because it's quite an undertaking to do 30 poems in 30 days. For more ambitious people, I'm actually going to try and I think we discussed this. I think we both might try and write more than 30. We might try and do a couple of poems per day, because we generally tend to feel, don't we, Cendrine, that you can make a collection of poems if you do more than the 30. Otherwise you tend to be waiting until November time, when there's National Blog Posting Month. But I think that everyone's going to be very, very busy. I think that if you can achieve at least one poem a day, I wouldn't say to try and write. I write quite long poetry, but it's good to try and look at syllable poetry or kind of short poetry. And also, if you work on one poem and you can't quite finish it, you don't have to publish it on your blog. You could store it and put it aside. The idea is so that you've, just like NaNoWriMo, you want to have some kind of draft. You want to have some kind of draft there. So if you went and wrote 30 draft poems over there, but you couldn't quite finish them all, then you could then spend the month of May working on those poems, and then you could put them into a book. So that is the idea of it. It's to produce enough poems to either give you a chapbook, or if you write more than one poem per day, if you write 2 poems per day, you've got enough for a full feature length collection. And that's the drive behind NaPoWriMo, and that's why we love doing it so much. Simply because we get to create all throughout the month. We get to use some interesting prompts. You don't have to follow the prompts every day. You can use your own prompts, whatever you want. If you're not inspired by a particular prompt, then look elsewhere, use something else. If you're inspired to write something else, just do that. because I find that sometimes you're not going to be inspired by the prompts on every single day. They might put something up and you might say, well, I don't want to write about my family or this, that, or the other, because it's just not something that appeals to you when in your writing. It might not be the type of poetry that you write. You might just write fantasy poetry or some other kind of poetry. So I just say use whatever inspiration you can. Try and take any kind of sort of visual prompts and inspiration that you can off of anything, and above all, have fun with it. And also, if you do have time, try to read and comment on other people's poems, because they will reciprocate. They will come back to you, and who knows, then they could be the same people that might want to actually purchase your books in the future, or even look at you in the anthology that we're going to be providing as well. You know, you might be able to build yourself up a little audience of like-minded poets that enjoy your work, and then they think, okay, this person's taken the time to read and appreciate my words, so maybe I'll do the same for them. So that's what I wanted to say about April. I think try and make it a community experience, make friends, don't be afraid to comment on people's things, try and be positive and supportive, and above all, have fun with it yourself.
I absolutely agree. Well done. Good tips. I know for me, I'm going to challenge myself this year because, as you know, I love the haiku. I write haiku. So my Sisku, you know, you could think, oh, I have my own poetry form and that's it. But this year, I'm challenging myself with some Japanese poetry forms. So we're talking about, I'm going to try the haibun, but I'm not really sure yet. But the choka, the dodoitsu, there's a katoda, I think, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to try several of them and see how fun it is. Even the senryu, I'm more into haiku. Senryu is a little more difficult for me, but it's got to be fun to challenge yourself. And especially in this day and age, we need a challenge to keep our mind busy. So really do not shy away from challenges as well. Try to find, and you mentioned it, try to find a poetry form that you enjoy and work with that, and then create your own poetry form too. So I mean, it's fun. I did it. It's a lot of fun, and I know you know someone, I think, if I'm not mistaken, who created their own poetry form as well, right?
I can't think of them off the top.
That's not you then. That's not you. I talked to someone else. They created another poetry form. I can't remember what it is, but it's also based on the haiku. This is very interesting to think that the haiku was on the I should say, one of the foundations of Japanese poetry. And it's interesting to see how many people I've used the haiku in around the world to create their own poetry forms. That's very, very interesting. The number of new poetry forms that pop up regularly and that are based on Japanese poetry forms, especially the haiku.
And I have another thing to say about prompts as well, is that what I've found, because I've done, as we said, I've done this for a few years with the National Poetry Writing Month, is that sometimes with the prompts, I feel like you need to combine a second or a third element. You might come along and it'll say, write a piece about family, or this picture is supposed to inspire something about family. Now, that on its own, to me, sometimes used to be like, I've got no idea, what am I going to do? And then I would think, okay, well, maybe I should think about a personal recollection myself, or maybe I should think about something that happened to me in the day that I could then combine with that. It might be that I spoke to a grandparent or something on the phone. You just think, oh, I'm going to write about my grandparent. But what you might find is the prompt itself won't necessarily give you exactly what you need to do, and it's difficult because they've got to give you something that is a very broad kind of prompt. They might come along and just one day say, just write a haiku, or write a haiku about snow, and you'll just be like, well, I don't have any snow where I am, so that could be a day where you'll pick an alternate prompt, so you could still write a haiku, or you still write about snow but not as a haiku, and they don't force you to follow those particular rules. But what the reason that I bring it up is because I've had countless times where I come along to the prompt and I just go, it's not doing anything for me. But then I found that when I combined it with a couple of other elements, so and this is why I like to write a lot of found poetry, because sometimes if I don't have the words, I could find the words somewhere else and then marry them together. But it might be that so this is a visual prompt that we're giving you today, and then you just think, is there an element that I can pick out of that visual prompt that would actually then help me, or if I combine it with something else, or even if I go to a different website and say, right, I found an alternative prompt today, I'm going to combine snow and feeling of happiness or something, and then that's what I got from another website, and that's how I think you write your your poems, because I think you'll find if you go into NaPoWriMo and just think I'll just use the prompts, there'll be a lot of times when you'll be frustrated because they won't quite give you, because it's impossible to cater for everybody's taste. So they try to give you a wide variety. And if you want to hit the 30 poems in 30 days, then I think you've got to have a mindset. And also, I would say it doesn't hurt to prepare yourself beforehand. You could start writing the foundations of some poems. You could start writing the bare bones. You could write scraps of lyrics or things, or even just ideas that you've got for poems, so that if you have difficult days where you can't use the prompt, or you're not inspired by the prompts, then you've got your backup, or that you've already got some foundation there that you can work with and say, this fits this particular prompt. I wrote about dogs the other day, and they said, write about an animal now. I've written about my dogs, and I could just do that. And you'll find yourself a lot happier, because if you're actually writing the things on the day itself, you might find that general everyday life is going to get in the way, and then all of a sudden you start getting behind. And a number of times I've done the NaPoWriMo, and I'm actually writing. They don't have any kind of strict rules, so you can catch up if you want. But sometimes I've been a few days behind, and it's been a kind of underdog, so I've got to catch up and get it all done, kind of sort of thing. But the number of times I would have liked to have been more prepared beforehand, and you know, and I'm getting better at it now. I'm getting kind of like more focused, but I still tend to. You have to wait for the prompt to be released. They don't give you all 30 up front. You're only given to them on the morning, and then you then submit them to the website if you want to. You don't have to link them to the official website, but if you do, then you get more views from people and more people commenting on the poems. But as I say, preparation is the key. If you can really think about what you want to write about, even if you decide on a theme, saying I'm going to write nothing but animal poems this particular month, whatever comes up, whatever kind of prompt or inspiration that I get, that's what I'm going to write about. Then that's good, because then that keeps you focused. Or I'm going to just write nothing but haikus. Again, if it's something that you've not done before, I would like to, like you say, Cendrine, I would challenge yourself. I would say that you can give yourself a different thing to do, because that's part of the fun. If every day you do a different form and you find 30 different forms, that is very fun to me. But also you get that element, so you can then say, right, I've got 30 different forms, but I don't have any themes. And then NaPoWriMo comes along and then says, okay, this is the theme, and you go, good, I can mash those two together, and that's how you write your poems.
You can also use pictures. You can go to my website and look at my photos, and you find the motivation, like hint, hint, subtle advertising.
Yeah, very, very helpful.
But you know, that's my second challenge to myself. I write to my own photos because why not? And you're not supposed to do that with haiku. You're supposed to describe a picture for the audience through your words. But I like using the photos because it helps me write better. But for other forms, so my challenge is not just Japanese poetry forms, also writing those poems based on specific photos that I choose for my website. So it's a lot of fun. You have to have a good imagination. Anyway, we're done for today. Well, it was a long conversation, a lot of great tips. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much for joining us today. And if you missed the show, that's okay. You can watch it another time. Today is March 21st, so it's spring, I think. It's spring today, and National Poetry Day. So as you said, David, prepare yourself, organize yourself, start now. National Poetry Day, take advantage. After this show, start writing.
Write something today, and then you've got one poem already written for then you've only got 29 to do. One down, 29 to go.
Exactly. So in any case, thank you, David, as always, for being with me for the fun conversation. Thank you all for joining us today. And we'll talk to you in a month. Have a great night, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.